It's my pleasure today to introduce Leah Breen, who is our Associate Vice President for the Division of K-12 Education Innovation and Scholar Success at Grand Valley State University. That may not be a name, it's not a name that rolls off my tongue, which is why I'm looking at my notes to remember the name of the full name of the division. It really expanded from our charter school authorization function into things that really enabled us to. Charter environments are interesting because they were founded as somewhat of alternatives, but also places to experiment and places to bring different pedagogy to life. And so we had broadened the mandate of that office to really think about K-12 innovation and the opportunities we had in front of us to really enrich lives for all students and not see the domain as charter and only charter, but we do education here, and we're influencing K through 12. So, but for those of you who don't know the scope and breadth of Leah's work, the charter portfolio includes now the Thompson Working Family Scholarship when they come to us and they become a part of the Working Scholarship. The Next Ed Collab, which is our space for experimentation, and over 40,000 students that are touched by Grand Valley in their K-12 experience, as well as 3,000 educators. I'm not going to go deep into her background. She has a very rich bio, but she's going to tell her story other than to say she came to us from being the state director at the Michigan Department of Education Office of Educator Excellence, where she helped secure over $550 million in investment to strengthen Michigan's educational workforce. She brings nearly 20 years of experience to Grand Valley and a lot of energy, a lot of sophistication, and I've been really enjoying working with Leah, so I know you're going to enjoy getting to know her. So let's welcome Leah.
Thank you for that warm introduction, and thank you everybody for being here. This is a great turnout. It's a beautiful day, and I appreciate that you're taking time from this beautiful day to hear the message. And also thanks to Michael, who actually nominated me for this talk. So thanks, Michael. So we're here to talk about how to move from surviving to thriving, and about having the courage to explore the unknown and getting remarkable results. And in order to do that, I have to give you I have to start at the beginning a little bit so you can understand my journey. I'm a Gen Xer. How many Gen Xers do I have in the room? Not many. Okay, all right, a couple. I was in a single parent household. I was a latchkey kid, which means every day I got off the bus, I trundled up my driveway, I opened the door, I picked up the key from the bottom of the door and unlocked it, went in by myself, fended for myself for a few hours. In the summertime, I did indeed drink out of the hose. One time, we had very little supervision. At one time, I was about 8 years old. I actually ran our decrepit riding lawnmower over a picnic table and smashed it because it was actually my job to mow the lawn at 8. Yeah. So my mom, even when she was home, she wasn't really home. My mom was an addict. A lot of my childhood memories center on survival, which are very different than other people's childhood memories, and I've come to realize this as I've gotten older. My childhood kind of involved things like avoiding having my mom drive me anywhere because I wasn't sure if that was going to be okay, and trying to act normal as a teenager when she would throw my clothes out in the lawn and lock me out for no reason. It did change the way that I am as an adult, though, and that's kind of how we go into this conversation. I'm going to start with do my slides here. So this is a big deal. At age 14, I got my first job at Little Caesars Pizza. It was about the only place close enough to walk to. And at age 16, I got my first car. This is a 1979 Plymouth Champ. I bet you've never seen one before. It cost $500. And that income from Little Caesars and this car when I turned 16 actually gave me a real sense of freedom. And it was kind of a dangerous combination because I had even less supervision than I had before with these two things in hand, and I thought I had a lot of money because I had all of this money. It was also my first glimpse of being able to move from kind of just surviving to thriving. I was able to start fending for myself, get around for myself, feed myself, do all the things I needed to do. I graduated a half semester early. I had just turned 17, and that's when I left home. It took me 7.5 years to get my bachelor's degree and my teaching certificate. During that time, I had 23 different part-time jobs, some of which I worked 3 and 4 at a time. I still graduated significantly in debt. So my childhood and my young adulthood really necessitated independence, but it also taught me resiliency, and being a low-income family in really a middle-income area instilled a drive in me to be successful. I was never, again, going to just survive. So despite all of that trauma, it really raised the courage to explore the unknown. I had to experience my own consequences, and some of them were good and some of them were bad, but I figured out things for myself. And some of those translated into personality traits, obviously, that are questionable, and some that are very good. For a long time, one of the key elements of my personality I used to describe as the opposite of imposter syndrome. And in fact, it wasn't until I was preparing for this talk that I actually Googled that and found out there's a word for it. So it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the Dunning-Kruger effect occurs when individuals overestimate their abilities and lack awareness of their limitations. Now, this sounds bad. But I like to think that there's a healthy dose of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So if you have the right amount, it can result in exploration and remarkable results. I went on to read that if you have too much, it can lead to ignorance and arrogance. So after years of therapy, I am hopeful that I am in the healthy range. Speaking of my therapist, she would say that I am the way that I am because I didn't have anyone who told me I couldn't or shouldn't do anything. And so then I just assumed I could do anything that I wanted. But I will say I'm also a rule follower, so I'm not just running around breaking the law. So I'm going to give you a real life example of the manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is the Acadia National Park. Has anybody ever been? Yeah, some hands. It's beautiful. So several years ago, my husband and I decided that we were going to go to Maine, we were going to visit the Acadia National Park, and we were going to hike some of the beautiful trails there. So we did what any average person would do. We were trying to decide which trail, so we stopped at a local watering hole, grabbed beer, asked the bartender, "What's your favorite trail?" And he immediately said, "The precipice." We were like, amazing. So we trundled on, we got to the bottom of the mountain and stopped at the ranger station as you're required to do, told the ranger our plan, got a map as you're required to do, had a quick conversation, went on our way, and we arrived at the base of the trail. So I'm going to read this for effect. Here's what the sign said at the base of the trail. Caution. The precipice is maintained as a non-technical climbing route, not a hiking trail. Attempt this route only if you are physically fit, wearing proper footwear, and have experience in climbing near exposed cliffs and heights. Allow 3 hours for a round-trip climb. Avoid this route during inclement weather or darkness. Stay on the trail, yada yada. Persons have received serious injuries and others have died on this mountainside. And then we saw this sign. I'll give you the highlights here. Think twice. One of Acadia's steepest and most challenging hiking trails. Serious injuries and fatalities have occurred on this trail. Now, my sweet husband is generally the voice of reason. He has the appropriate responses to things. And he said, "I do not think we should do this." And I said, "Why not?" Now, in my defense, right, the bartender had looked at us. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I was also wearing skinny jeans and Converse shoes. Now, the bartender had looked at us. He had seen what I was wearing and the fact that we were wildly underprepared. And also the ranger had, and at the bottom of this hill, there was a boulder, and it said, if you do not proceed if you can't climb over this boulder. It was like a test boulder. And we cleared that, no problem. We were healthy. We were physically fit. It would be fine. It would be fine. So we did. So this trail, it took us 4 hours, not 3, as it implied. And it definitely had rings straight up the mountainside that you climbed. Also had a lot of these skinny ledges that you had to shimmy across sideways, and you would hold on to this pipe or this rope in front of you in case you lost your balance. In this particular slide, there's a 90-degree corner right here, and there's a woman on the other side, and all we can hear, we can't see her, all we can hear is her saying, I can't move, I can't do it, I can't move, I can't do it, I can't move, I can't do it, over and over again. She was panicking, and I actually started to panic a little bit. It was very windy out here. Yeah. And then never fear. We made it to the top. This sign actually says the same thing as the bottom one did, and I'm like, what good is this up here? Going down was the easy part. There's a lot more that happened on this trail. It's actually a very fun story to tell in full. And the point is, we said yes to the unknown, and it was one of the dumbest, most fulfilling experiences that we've ever done. Now, I know this makes me sound like a thrill seeker, and I swear that's not it. Oh. I actually did not think this would be a big deal. I thought it would be very interesting. I was certain we were capable of it. It never crossed my mind that we couldn't or shouldn't do it, and that is the Dunning-Kruger effect right there. I did have some second thoughts while we were up there. So the Dunning-Kruger effect has actually led to a lot of unique interests in my life. My daughter, in fact, says whenever I run into Mr. Smith, he always asks what you're doing because you're always up to something. So complete a triathlon, sure. I competitively race dragon boats. It's actually me. This was in Puerto Rico a few weeks ago. Is a vacation even a vacation if you don't need a helmet? The Dunning-Kruger effect actually transferred over into my professional life. So once I graduated college, I applied for a job at the International Academy of Flint. At the end of my interview, I was offered either a classroom teaching position or a Title I teaching position. So I said, I'll take the Title I position, why not? I didn't even know what that meant or what it was. I decided that was the job for me. I'm actually still unclear if it was because I interviewed so well that I had this opportunity or because nobody else would take this job. Not sure. So kind of moving forward a little bit, at one point in my career, I ended up accepting a contract with the Michigan Department of Education. And my job was to oversee supplemental educational services in Michigan. How many of you remember the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002? Oh, look, everybody does. That's impressive. Okay. All right, so signed into Congress under George Bush. The premise was high standards, high accountability for schools, for others who don't know in the room. And it had a lot of controversial components to it. I'm not sure that any was as controversial as supplemental educational services. So if you're unsure what that is, essentially schools were provided a per pupil allowance that students and families could use for tutoring services. And they had to be by approved vendors, and it was MDE's job to approve those vendors and monitor their performance. So when I arrived and I accepted this contract, the way that it was explained to me is that vendors are running rampant, there's a ton of misuse of funds, and we need somebody to clean it up. I had no background in this, none whatsoever. But I thought, I can figure it out. Why not? So I took the job. Now, there were 3 types of vendors. There were reputable, high-quality vendors, places like Sylvan Learning Center that are established and had lots of, rules and supports. And then there were vendors that were kind of purposefully taking advantage of the situation. So, for example, we had vendors that would provide school principals kickbacks for every student they recommended to enroll in their program. And then we had vendors that had really no idea what they were doing, and so they were accidentally taking advantage of the situation. And the example I always like to use here is I had asked a vendor to demonstrate that they had sufficient cash on hand so that they could be fiscally viable for at least 6 months. And in response, they mailed me a photograph of a newspaper with the date circled in the corner, so I knew it was recent, and a fan of $100 bills across the front. I was looking for like bank statements. So after sifting through a lot of paperwork, a lot of complaints, I decided that this situation required a radical response, and I required every vendor to reapply for approval in Michigan. And I don't think there were 1,000 vendors, but there were hundreds and hundreds of vendors. So it was a pretty big undertaking. It took several weeks. In the end, I think we reduced the amount of approved vendors by at least 60%. And we hoped what was left were ones that would serve students and families successfully. With the following year, we didn't have any complaints about services. And in the end, we saved about an estimated $20 million of misused funds. So this was really the first time I had radical results. I said yes to this opportunity. I did the job well and had this, really, really huge return on my investment. At a midpoint in my career, I was able to engage in some professional development called the Fit Leaders Academy. This is David Chinsky. And this professional development taught me the skills about how to change one of my key phrases, which you've heard me say, which is "why not?" to guide my life, into some other phrases about how I could lead and support people around me. So these next two are Chinskyisms. If we could, how would we? And yes, and. And these are the three phrases that I use to govern the work that I do, and I use with others to encourage people to thrive in their roles. So if somebody brings me a good idea, and well, I'm going to reverse that. If I have a good idea, which occasionally I do, and others don't want to get on board, I usually start with why not, right? So what is the barrier to the situation? And I gather feedback. And then I say, but if we could, how would we? And this opens up doors to creativity, imagination. It removes barriers. If we could, how would we? It allows people to throw out ideas that are unusual and unique. And then the last phrase, yes, and, is I always try not to say no. I always try to start, or yes, but, which is actually saying no. So when somebody brings me an idea, if I have reservations about it, I might say, yes, and if you could bring me more information about this part of it, I'd like us to continue the discussion. What I'm hoping is they're either going to bring me enough information so that it turns my yes and into yes, or that through that exploration, they're going to realize that perhaps it's a no, because it's not a feasible solution. Okay. So, moving that forward, this approach to leadership that I've described, using these three phrases, being open to exploration, actually led me to 5 promotions within the Department of Education in 5 years, until I ended up in the role that President Mantella described, which was the State Director for the Office of Educator Excellence. So all things educator, including professional development, preparation, certification, criminal convictions, lots of stories about that. And again, I did not know anything about this content. And I actually raised this when this position was offered to me. And I'll never forget what the assistant superintendent said at the time. She said, I'm not hiring you because you know content. I'm hiring you because of the way that you lead. In 2019, I was approached by a legislative liaison at the Department of Education who said, I have a bipartisan group of legislators who would like to introduce some legislation around educator preparation and certification for the state of Michigan. and they need a content expert, and you've been asked to join this group. I was like, great, this is really exciting. I had never really spoken to a legislator one-on-one. I had provided legislative testimony before, but that's very different. It's very scripted. So this individual, my mentor at the time, would walk me from my current building over to where we would meet with this bipartisan group, and he would provide me prompts on the way. He would say, you're meeting with Senator so-and-so, here are their positions on issues, here are other things that you need to know. Their daughter is playing golf at U of M, so ask how their daughter's golf game is, right? He taught me how to speak to the legislators in a way that they would listen, and that started with building relationships. There was also a lot of trial and error in this. He quite literally kicked me under the table several times while we were talking when I would let my face take a tone. So you have to remember, at this time I was very deep into this work. I was very invested in teacher preparation and certification in Michigan, and this group really was intending on solving problems, and they really did have radical approaches. So over time, I learned to use my guiding phrases with this group and really never to tell them no. That did not go well. And so they would say things like, how about we just remove all of the certification requirements in Michigan and anybody can be a teacher? And I would say, yeah, you can do that. And would you like to hear what your constituents might think? Or they would say, let's make it so that you only need a high school diploma to be a substitute teacher. And I would say, yeah, sure, you could do that. And you might want to think about the fact that you'll have other 18-year-olds teaching 18-year-olds in that scenario, right? Yes, and. COVID hit, which delayed implementation of this and really changed our focus into helping students and teachers and families and all of us and each other through the epidemic. And during that time, the teacher shortage that we had going into was exacerbated by the pandemic, as I'm sure many of you know, lots of retirements, lots of people leaving the profession. Post-COVID, the state superintendent all of a sudden began asking me, what are you doing about the teacher shortage? And I was like, sir, I've been working on certification and preparation, and we don't have any money to be working on teacher shortage. And it also kind of felt insurmountable. What in the world was I and this team of people going to do about the teacher shortage? And when I say he began asking me, I mean every time I bumped into him in the hallway, he would say, what are you doing about the teacher shortage? It's like, no pressure, right? No pressure. So eventually we put together a document and said, like, this is what we've been working on. Here are some of the things that we do around the teacher shortage. But really, we don't have much of a plan. And he didn't use these words, but he turned my my phrases against me. And he essentially said, well, if you could, how would you? So he asked for a budget proposal to solve the teacher shortage, and he gave us 48 hours. 48 hours. We had been talking about it. This is not as though it hadn't been discussed. So that was in good news. So we all gathered in a room, and we put our heads together, and we put a bunch of things on a piece of paper, and we said, here's what we would do to solve the teacher shortage. He was like, all right, this is actually great. This is a great start, right? And we must have revised that document over the next couple of weeks, probably 8 to 10 times. We had to put numbers to it. We had to say how much things would cost, how many people would be affected. We were guessing. And finally handed it over, and he said, this is great. Now I need you to double it to $1 billion because I need room to negotiate. So we went back, we added a whole bunch of other stuff, created a bunch of different formats to display it in. And really, the key to legislation is having the right proposal with the right people at the right time. And this was actually our time. So at the same time, I should say, we actually got national recognition for this. Down below here it honors Dr. Sarah Kate Levan, who now has joined us at GVSU for her presentation to the U.S. Department of Education on this work. So during this time, when all of this was happening, I was realizing two things. I was no longer the leader that I wanted to be. I was burned out in this role. And there was a great team behind me that actually did not need me anymore and could do this work. There was great succession, and it was okay for me to move on. So I left the Department of Ed in 2023. At the same time, the legislature appropriated $550 million to implement the plan that we had conjured up in less than 6 weeks. It included all of our hopes and dreams. Now remember, I had never worked in teacher preparation or certification before when I started this role. And the shared efforts of all of this people over all of this time created radical results. All because I had the courage to say yes to the unknown over and over again when people invited me to. And I had the courage to take advantage of the opportunities to lead others through these experiences as well. So today, I continue to say yes. I joined the Laker family in 2023 after departing the Department of Education. I had never before worked at an institution of higher education. It's still very foreign to me. This is a different world, everybody, just in case you didn't know. I have said yes to 2 promotions in 2 years since I have been here. And I'm so grateful to continue to be presented with opportunities for my own growth and to make radical change and continue exploring. So today, I will leave you with this. Think about something that you've always wanted to do. Bake sourdough, take a safari, try out for a game show, and then think, if I could, how would I? Thank you. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
So my name is Chris Surfice. I work in modern languages and literatures. I'm curious, especially with the enrollment and demographic trends that we're seeing, in your perspective in charter schools, what are some of the biggest challenges that our K-12 institutions are facing these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually the trend in traditional public schools is decreasing and enrollment in charter public schools is increasing. So this tells me a couple of things. One, that parents are very interested in exercising their options for choice, and the traditional public school may not be a great fit for them. I would say some of the challenges that, one of the biggest challenges that we see is chronic absenteeism. So it is a problem in most areas, and it is a problem to the extent that schools are losing funding because they don't have enough students at school on any given day. Target goals for enrollment are things like 50%, like if they can get 50% attendance on a given day in some cases. So that's certainly one of the big barriers. Second, literacy. You know, there's a big push in the legislature for literacy, which is great. I've had the opportunity to actually join the governor's literacy group and watch her roll out kind of the literacy initiatives. Hopefully there's some good work. There's a lot of funding to go with it. That's usually very helpful. Let's see. And third, I would say the antiquated model of instruction, right? We need to really begin working on technology skills, career skills, all of the things that we need for students to be ready for both college and the workforce in order to keep up with AI and everything else that's happening in the world. The K-12 system very much works on the 50-minute period model, changing classes, blocks, and credits of instruction. And at some point that just has to go away. It's no longer feasible. Thank you for asking.
So I'm Ryan. I am the Vice Provost for Research and Innovation. My question comes down to your background and your not background in higher ed. So from your lens, what are your thoughts on how, we'll talk about Grand Valley specifically, but in general, how can higher ed do better connecting with K through 12? Because that gap has been, well, I think it was enormous, and only in the last 15 to 20 years has it started to narrow because of necessity. And your outside lens coming into higher ed, in my opinion, is hugely valuable. Now you've been in higher ed for more than a minute. So can you talk to us a bit about how you see the divide between K through 12 and higher ed, and how some of those gaps could be filled, both in general or specifically to Grand Valley? Because universities are not the same as K through 12 systems aren't the same. So I think your lens is really important, and I value your viewpoint.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, one of the benefits of being a charter school authorizer, such as Grand Valley State University, is that you have this mutual opportunity, right? So our K-12 schools can bring things to the university, and the university can bring things to our K-12 schools. Expertise, resources, opportunity, right? So we've actually been working really hard to connect Grand Valley to our charter public schools. There's a great space there to incubate innovation, to test ideas, to form deep relationships, because the size makes it very accessible. So that's something that we've been working on. You may all have heard of the Impact 30 grant. That was one of our new initiatives to really connect some project-based learning into our school settings. Outside of that, I think that we have been working, there's an influence in the other direction, right? So things that we bring into our charter public school space from Grand Valley State University, we would like to launch into the greater community through the Next Ed Collab, right? So we're doing creative things in these spaces. It's an opportunity for us to then share that with other traditional schools, right? And advance the work that they're doing through our relationship with Grand Valley. So that's a huge opportunity that we have. From just a bigger perspective, it is a really missed opportunity, right? So dual enrollment is underutilized. Relationships with community colleges is underutilized. And I think that some of those things are difficult to navigate. And so I think as in these roles that we have, especially when we can touch K-12 schools, it's really important that we start removing some of those boundaries, start making connections within other organizations to help them remove boundaries. And then other than that, just, we bringing kids to campus. So that is one of the other great aspects that we have the college exploration. So we start in 8th grade with our charter school students. I know that we do in other spaces as well. And there needs to be more of that to get the campus feel and start building those relationships with schools at young ages.
So I work in the Career Center. My name is Jamisa Edmondson, and I'm always just curious because I feel like I talk to students and they work throughout college and they feel like these experiences aren't relevant. If you were to talk about one of your 22 jobs you mentioned, which one would you say prepared you the most for the work that you're doing now, or even the work you did at the Michigan Department of Education?
Oh, gosh. Customer service. I mean, I had a million bartending, serving, hotel jobs where I had to do a lot of customer service and really learned the value of making people happy, even when they were feeling unhappy. So that is a tremendous skill. I also did a lot in the education space. So I did respite care. I did some work in education programs, and it was allowed me to see education through another lens, particularly with families as students with tremendous special needs, and so kind of got to see that aspect for areas of growth. But man, customer service, the skills that students will learn in their high school and their college years about how to serve others and serve them well will benefit them for a lifetime.
So this is a little bit of turn on Ryan's question. So when I was at my former institution, which had co-op throughout the curriculum, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to convene K through 12 educators and help them move towards more integrated work in the learning model. When we actually did the convening, we learned that they were ahead of us in some areas. And that was very humbling. And it was a great opportunity to see the mutuality of learning from one another, which is why I love your Impact 30 idea. Where are some spaces where you believe K through 12 is ahead of higher education?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I think in some spaces, schools are doing project-based learning very well, and they're relying on, instead of credit-bearing content, skills-based content, it's very small pockets. I think that they are ahead of their institutions in some ways in that space. I also think that the connection to careers in the core content. So in sometimes in our K-12 schools, you'll see there's a lot of connection in math courses to perhaps CTE and career options. I think at the university in our lower coursework, we don't emphasize that. We're still talking about skills, and we hone in on the career opportunities kind of as they move forward out of that lower coursework. So I think early exploration of CLEAR, even in basic content curriculum, is another way perhaps. Yeah. Okay, we'll end on that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it.
Yep, I was going to say, let's thank Leah. That was great.